Again, you guys give yourselves a round of applause for coming and joining us tonight. Our final speaker for this evening is Amir Abdel Malik. He serves as an imam of Masjid Al-Salams in Oakland. He's been there for over 20 years. Give that a round of applause. Nowadays, we just find longevity to be extinct. That's all. Abdel Malik has dedicated his life's work to community building, teaching Islam, and advocating for the oppressed and disenfranchised. We are delighted to have Amir Abdel Malik with us tonight. Welcome. Yes.
Oh, that's nothing, huh? That's okay. That's okay, I'll do this. I'm all right. I'm all right. I'm all right. I'm all right. Okay. Is that okay right here? Yeah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله أحمده واستعينه واستهديه واستغفره وأؤمن به جل وعلا ولا أكفره وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. My respected brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you in the greeting words of peace. Peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. Let's get going. Make sure I'm timing myself here. In the Holy Quran, Allah talks about Pharaoh. As a matter of fact, many people may not know, but the prophet who's talked about the most in the Holy Quran is the prophet Moses. No other prophet is talked about as much in the Holy Quran than the prophet Moses, peace be upon him. Allah talks about how Moses, peace be upon him, when he was living in Egypt, Pharaoh divided up his society into different groups, and he oppressed every one of the groups. And there was a particular group in Pharaoh's society who he was particularly afraid of because he felt a revolution would come from them. And he was particularly afraid of the men who would come from them. And those people were called the Bani Israel. And so Pharaoh, afraid of particularly that particular group, he instituted a policy of killing the boys and sparing the women. Not sparing the women from oppression, but killing the boys, getting the men out the way. Because he was concerned that the revolutionary is going to come from that particular group, and it's going to come from the men of that particular group. If you take that example in the Quran and apply it to America, you will see that America has set up this society into different groups, and all the groups are being oppressed. The Latinos, the black folks, Asian, Muslims, different groups. But there's a particular group that this government fears could cause a revolution. And that particular group are black people. And from these black people, the men from this group, someone will come from the men from this group. And so therefore, we have to institute a policy of killing the men and sparing the women. So you young brothers, and see, we have to have talks with our sons. Just like mothers have talked with their daughters about, you're going to become a woman someday, here's some of the things that happen, so on and so forth. We have to have talks with our sons that they are living in a society that is designed to destroy them. Step 1, son, they're going to separate you from your father. Step 2, son, they're going to give you a poor education and probably put you in special ed to make you think you're stupid. Step 3, son, you're going to rebel against that. And therefore, you're going to drop out of school and then up in the streets. Step 4, son, once you get in the streets, it's either or prison. Syllabus, son, of how to kill a black man. And so if we do not sit down with our daughters and talk about the changes that they're going through as women, that's cruel and irresponsible. If we don't sit down with our sons and let them know how this system systematically tries to destroy black men, starting with black boys that is cruel and irresponsible. They have to know the type of society that they are living in so they'll know how to look at it. They have to understand how this society views them. Do you know this society is so cold that if they see that a black boy had a problem birth, meaning like, you know, the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, so on and so forth, alhamdulillah, he came through, they use that as an excuse to put a jacket on him all throughout school. The next thing you know, he flunks the first grade. How you flunk the first grade? But that puts a jacket on him, and it gives him a feeling of inferiority. It gives him a feeling like, you know, he ain't got it, and so on and so forth, all throughout. And then they hit him with felonies at 16 and 17 years old. And if you haven't read the book, The New Jim Crow, you have to read the book, The New Jim Crow. Because once you hit a young brother with a felony at 17, 18, 19 years old, for the rest of his life, he can be legally discriminated against. And so this is a society, a pharaonic society, that sees as their biggest threat the African American. Why? Example, don't you see how other people imitate y'all? Whatever youth in America are doing, if you want to know what youth in America are doing, look at black youth. Because whatever black youth are doing, that's what all other youth are going to be doing. In Malaysia, it's the style to look like a young black male. In Malaysia. They hip-hopping in China. They hip-hopping in India. It is the influence that black people have that scares the system. So that's why you see on TV so many negative images of black men. Criminals, and whoa, hold your purse. Oh my God, a black man, that kind of thing. Because this system looks at black people in general and the black man in particular as the revolutionaries who could come and destroy our whole setup. That's what's going on. Now, Malcolm. This system thought that Malcolm was the Messiah. Quotation marks. I'll quote the FBI. We must prevent the rise of a Messiah. Quotation marks. You know in English, when you put quotation marks, it means figure of speech. That's what the FBI did. We must prevent the rise of a Messiah who could unify and electrify the black nationalist movement. Malcolm X might have been such a Messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. So this system felt that the Messiah might have been an African American male Muslim. And if you think that they got away from that, think again when you think about the fact that one of the people who they thought would carry on that role was a man by the name of H. Rap Brown, who became Imam Jamil Abdullah El Amin, who's being locked down in Colorado underground for a crime that he didn't commit. Preventing the rise of a Messiah is still the policy of the United States government. This government is still afraid of the legacy that was laid down by Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. If you go back to the inauguration of Barack Obama, Dianne Feinstein, when she got up there, she took a stab at Malcolm at the inauguration. This is how much they're afraid of him. Dianne Feinstein got up there and said, she praised everyone who voted for Obama. We'll talk about Obama a little later, inshallah. But she praised everyone for voting for Obama, and she praised them by saying, for those of you who chose the ballot over the bullet. They are still afraid of Malcolm to this day, because the effects of Malcolm are still being felt around the world. When the United States government says to Americans, do not go to that part of the world, they ain't talking about us. We can go. They talking about Joe the plumber. Joe the plumber can't go, but we can go. Seriously, black people can go. We can go. Now we can't go over there, Uncle Tommy. We go over there, Uncle Tommy, we can get snatched up. But you know, as black folks, we can go. How come we can go? Because Malcolm, when he went international, he internationalized our struggle. And so people all around the world, y'all underestimate how much people around the world respect us because we are black people in America and because of our legacy of resistance and struggle. You'd be surprised. The government, the system, knows how much we are respected. That's why they needed a black man in the White House. Now, Malcolm. We'll get back in terms of how he internationalized our struggle. Now, Malcolm. I like the format. It reminds me of the Quran when Allah says, truly you shall move from stage to stage. And Malcolm moved from stage to stage. As Malcolm Little, as the brother and the sister showed, Malcolm grew up in a strong household, mother and father strong, and people used to underestimate because they didn't know how active Malcolm's mother and father was in the Garvey movement. The movement of Garvey, you cannot underestimate the movement of Garvey. But this is Garvey had the largest organization among African Americans in our history. If y'all ever seen Red, Black, and Green, we thought that started in the 60s. No, it started in the 20s. Marcus Garvey started Red, Black, and Green, right? But he had like 3 to 6 million people in his organization. But growing up, you saw no effects of the Garvey movement. Where's the effects of the Garvey movement? Where's it at? Because this was a huge movement, straight up, right? But then there were subtle manifestations of the Garvey movement. Remember the Deacons for Defense? The Deacons for Defense down south? Those were the children of Garveyites. Remember in the Montgomery bus boycott, what did they name the organization? The Montgomery Improvement Association. What was Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association? Malcolm's father was a Garveyite. Used to go to different, him and his wife used to go to different parts of the country, setting up chapters of the Garvey movement. Malcolm's mother had a cousin who was one of Marcus Garvey's bodyguards, that when Garvey was going around, one of the places he would stay was their house. And so Malcolm and his sisters and brothers remembered some of the Garveyite meetings. They remembered. And so what happened, of course, was that in order to destroy the family, what they have to do? Go after the father. Because the household was disciplined. He could build his own house. He could grow his own food. His wife, very educated, taught the children French, made sure they didn't eat pork. They would like homeschooled them, basically. Homeschooled the children. Malcolm's mother, right? This was an organized, disciplined household. Go after the father. And once they went after the father, then it was only a matter of time before the family was destroyed. Malcolm, of course, then is parceled off. His family's parceled off. Malcolm goes to the 8th grade. Malcolm tells his teacher, I want to be a lawyer. You can't be no lawyer, Malcolm. You're a nigger. Malcolm was finished with school after that. Malcolm's formal education was the 8th grade. The 8th grade was the extent of his formal education. So, of course, you drop out of school, right? Because of the discouragement that you get in school. You special ed, you can't do it. Discouragement. You drop out. Once you drop, father's already gone. Discouraged in the schools. Where is he going from there? The streets. And so now Malcolm Little now becomes Detroit Red, getting into a little bit of everything. Always high, getting into everything, right? Got to Boston, got to Roxbury, and then he went to Harlem and said, oh my Lord. Because Harlem is just Harlem. Harlem's still Harlem. They moving black folks out of Harlem right now, but Harlem's still Harlem though. And Malcolm saw that, and of course Malcolm just got busy in them streets. And of course, once you get busy in them streets, it's only a matter of time before you're gonna end up in prison. Malcolm ends up in prison, about 19 years old. Malcolm is reading and writing at a 4th grade level. A 4th grade level when he gets to prison, right? 2 things happen to Malcolm in prison, of course. One, the brother in prison, Malcolm, he it's another name change. Satan. The prisoner called Malcolm Satan. Not the prison guards, the prisoners called Malcolm Satan because he curses all the time and he always cursing God and he's always cursing religion. Man, that's Satan. So now Detroit Red becomes Satan. And so while he's in prison, one brother in prison who Malcolm respected for his knowledge, Malcolm said he can control a conversation without cursing. And in an autobiography, he called him Bimby as a fictitious name. And this brother told Malcolm, you got a good mind, man. You got a good mind. You should really work on your mind. That's the first thing that happened to Malcolm, right? I'll say 3 things. The second major thing that happened to Malcolm, Ella, his sister. This is one of the reasons why Spike Lee's movie was probably the biggest flaw in Spike Lee's movie. He didn't mention Ella at all. And Ella was always there at the major points in Malcolm's life. This was no different. Ella told Malcolm, I'm gonna get you transferred to a prison that's known for having a library. This rich white man left his library to this prison. And so she, knowing that, had Malcolm transferred to that prison to take advantage of that library. The third thing, his brother got with him and said, man, I found the religion of the black man. Look here, stop eating pork. Malcolm stopped eating pork, got all over prison. Hey man, Satan don't eat pork no more. Satan don't eat pork. Satan don't eat pork. That kind of thing, right? And then later on, I think it was Reginald, he told him about the nation of Islam, the religion of the black man, Islam. And they was just bringing it. The Nation of Islam was the closest thing, the closest organization that was connected to the legacy of the Garvey movement. And that's not dealt with like it should be, right? The closest thing to the Garvey movement that we could see at that time was the Nation of Islam. Elijah Muhammad was influenced by Marcus Garvey. Noble Drew Ali was influenced by Marcus Garvey. And so this was the closest thing to the Garvey movement. Why did Malcolm and his brothers and sisters respond to the Nation of Islam? Look how they was raised. Because when they saw the Nation of Islam, it reminded them of the Garvey movement. It reminded them of what they had. And so the Nation of Islam was designed to wake black people up and to get black folks out of that mentality. You know, we were taught, you know, when you're taught that God is white, that's gonna mess you up in terms of inferiority, and it's gonna mess white folks up in terms of superiority complex. That's a cold shot when you tell a people, this is God, and this is who God looked like, and he don't look nothing like you. Matter of fact, you look closer to the devil than to God. And the nation said, oh no, the white man is not God, the white man the devil. Black man ain't the devil, black man God. And so when black folks heard that, black folks said, yeah. And then when you take the history of the quote unquote white man and you throw his history down, you say he got to be the devil. You know what I'm saying? You know, because it's history. It's historical stuff. And so this stuff was waking us up. This stuff was waking us up, getting us off heroin, getting us off the block, getting us off the corner, so on and so forth. And the Nation of Islam became the largest, most organized, most militant, most richest organization in the black community. And one of the things that the Nation of Islam can teach us, go and check out the book on Malcolm X at Harvard. Minister Malcolm X, went to Harvard and was talking to them white kids at Harvard about the big-headed scientists. He started talking about the big-headed scientists and whoop-de-whoop-de-woo, and you put a needle in the head, dum-dum-dum, and that's where y'all white folks came from. And whoop-de-whoop-de-woo, it's at Harvard, right? And Malcolm's just running it down. He's breaking it down, right? At Harvard. And so he's talking about the big-headed scientists, the spaceship, the mothership, whoop-de-whoop-de-woo, and Malcolm say, what? It was an excellent lesson in believing in our own reality. This is our reality. I'm at Harvard. This is our reality. And there was nothing they could do. However, the seeds of its own destruction were in the Nation of Islam. Because you can't become free against your oppressor by imitating your oppressor. Our oppressor taught us that God was material. Our oppressor taught us that God was a man. Our oppressor taught us that God had a color. And what we simply did, we simply disagreed with what color God was. But we agreed with our oppressor that God was material. We agreed with our oppressor that God had a sex. We agreed with our oppressor that God was a man. We agreed with our oppressor that God had a color. But we just didn't agree that God was white. God is black, man. Sort of like how we do Santa Claus. Santa Claus ain't white. Santa Claus is black. Now, that's a step in the right direction, but you can't stay there. It's a step in the right direction because it's showing that, you kind of waking up to certain things, but you can't stay there. Because if you stay there, you'll end up making the same mistakes as your enemy. And so that was part of the seeds of the destruction that were in the Nation of Islam. not taking away from the good that was done. Inside the Nation of Islam, Malcolm felt that the Nation of Islam should have been incorporated into the Southern Freedom Movement, the so-called Civil Rights Movement. Malcolm was training a different generation of ministers, including Louis Farrakhan. He was training young ministers. And Malcolm felt, we got money, we don't rely on no white folks for finances, we got our own paramilitary, we should inject ourselves into the Civil Rights Movement. The nation had a non-engagement policy that bothered Malcolm. And so Malcolm worked hard to build the nation. It wasn't just Malcolm. It was Malcolm, one of his brothers, and one of his sisters, because they grew up in Garvey. Now, inside the nation, like all other black organizations, was infiltrated. There were two elements in the Nation of Islam that were negative elements. One, the infiltrators. Two, a group in the Nation of Islam who became attracted to wealth. The nation was bringing in $750,000 a week, cash money. And there was a group inside the Nation of Islam that wanted to live large. And the infiltrators in the Nation of Islam who were working for the government worked on that particular group who wanted to live large. And those particular groups conspired to have Malcolm kicked out the Nation of Islam. If you don't believe me, read the book, The Agents of Repression, when the FBI admitted their role in having Malcolm kicked out of the Nation of Islam. They didn't want the Nation of Islam injected into the Southern Freedom Movement because that would have been a major force in the movement itself. And then there was talk that Malcolm would take over after Elijah Muhammad died. All that was fitna. All that was designed to make people jealous. That was planned. And so Malcolm is kicked out the Nation of Islam. But as Allah says, man plans and Allah plans. And truly Allah is the best of planners. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not allow Malcolm, with his sincerity, to die in that condition. Because the only sin that Allah does not forgive is to die worshiping a false god. That's the only sin that's not forgiven. Every other sin is forgiven. You can't think of a sin that Allah does not forgive. The only sin He doesn't forgive is when a person dies worshiping a false god. And Malcolm admitted that he worshiped the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He worshiped him. In the Quran, one of the manifestations of somebody worshiping another human being, when Allah says something is good, if a human being says no, that thing is bad, if we follow that person who says this thing is bad, that Allah said is good, and you follow a person who says that, you're worshiping that person. And so Malcolm was worshiping the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, worshiping him. Any human being who's being worshiped, that's going to mess up that human being who's being worshiped, and it's going to mess up that human being who's worshiping the human being. The human being was not meant to be worshiped. It is not in our fitrah. It is not in our nature. And something always goes wrong when a human being is worshiped. Something always goes wrong. And so Malcolm was kicked out of the Nation of Islam by the government and the corrupt element inside the nation, but man plans, Allah plans, and truly Allah is the best of planners. Like Moses tried to kill all the baby boys. He tried to kill all the baby boys to keep the revolutionary from coming up. And Allah says, you idiot. Here comes his wife. Pharaoh, look. Look at this baby. I want to keep him. Okay. Kill him. You idiot. You will clothe, you will feed, you will educate the one you're looking for. See, when you try to get over on Allah, He slaps you upside your head. When you try to get over Allah and try to outthink Allah, Allah shows you how idiotic you are. The one you're looking for, you adopted him. Man plans, Allah plans, and truly Allah is the best of planners. Allah wanted Malcolm out of the Nation of Islam. And then when Malcolm left the nation, kicked out the nation, he realized that his suspension was indefinite, and he realized it's time to go. He went to go see who? Ella. And Ella had insight. Ella understood that Malcolm was a historical figure. She recognized in him and saw in him, you're a historical figure. While he was alive, she saw it. She said, now Ella had left the nation already on her own, and she came to the Quran and Sunnah, al-Islam. She even started us Arabic school. Ella was no joke. couldn't speak a stitch of Arabic. She just hired somebody who did. You know what I'm saying? Ella was no joke, you know what I'm saying? And so Malcolm goes to Ella, I want to take my pilgrimage to Mecca. She said, I already saved up for me to go. You take it. It's more significant that you go than me. Because when Malcolm went to the Hajj to Mecca, Malcolm made the pilgrimage famous among black people. Black people may not know nothing about Islam, but they knew about the pilgrimage. They knew about that pilgrimage because of Malcolm. When Malcolm went on his pilgrimage, a revolution took place inside Malcolm. A revolution took place inside of him. He went from shirk, worshiping of a false god, to tawheed, the worship of the one God. That was first. That was a revolution. And Malcolm also understood that he couldn't say all white people. He can't say all white people are bad. That's like white people saying all black people are bad. See, imitate what you think you're fighting against? I can't say that. Malcolm understood, no, there's some white people cool. I'm going to judge white people according to their behavior, their conscious behavior and their deeds. Because if I condemn that, they could change that. If I condemn them for being white, they can't change being white. Just like we can't change being black, right? So I'm gonna condemn them based on something that they have control over, something that they can change, their deeds, their conscious behavior. And so when Malcolm goes on Hajj, he went on his Hajj, he went to Arabia, he took his Shahada, he became a Muslim. Becoming a Muslim means that you follow the Holy Quran and the Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah, who lived 1400 years ago. He became a Muslim. Whenever you become a Muslim, all your sins are forgiven. He goes on his Hajj. When you go on Hajj, afterwards, all your sins are forgiven. So Allah is cleaning them up. Allah is cleaning them up inside. Allah is cleaning them up ideologically. Allah is cleaning them up spiritually. Allah is cleaning them up intellectually. Allah is cleaning them up on the physically. He's cleaning them up. And then once Malcolm finishes Hajj, then Allah sends him on his way to Africa. Now that you're clean, now that you're cleaned up, go on your mission. And Malcolm goes to these different places of Africa, brothers and sisters. They accepted Malcolm. They accepted him as if he was the head of a state. They accepted Malcolm as if he was a leader of his own country. And Malcolm was representing us. He wasn't representing Uncle Sam. When Jesse went to Africa, under Clinton, Jesse was representing Uncle Sam. That's why Jesse ain't dead. Jesse was representing the U.S. government on behalf of the U.S. government to get the Africans to accept the African, basically a bill that would recolonize Africa. When Malcolm went to Africa, he was accepted like he was a head of state, and he was representing us. Malcolm had taken things to such a level. One, of course, getting us to look at ourselves differently. You can't discount the training that he got in the nation. It was very, very important. It was very important. And so you have to take what he got out of the nation, and whatever he got out of the nation, as long as it doesn't conflict with Islam, you take it. You take it. And there were many things he got from the nation that didn't conflict with Islam. You take it. Self-esteem, because when you deal with black folks, you got to deal with our self-esteem. And we have to come up with a way of how to deal with our self-esteem without becoming arrogant. We got to deal with that, right? Because if we become arrogant, then we just like him. How do we develop a normal self-esteem that all people should simply have? A normal self-confidence. We got to figure out how to do that. Malcolm was getting us to see ourselves differently. Malcolm's insight was like sharp. Malcolm knew the significance of Cassius Clay before he became Muhammad Ali. Malcolm said, this young man is going to be a cultural force among black youth. That's when he was Cassius Clay. And that's exactly what Muhammad Ali became, a force, a cultural force, particularly among black youth. Malcolm had such a keen insight. So when Malcolm goes to Africa, he's setting things up for us. When Malcolm comes back here, the so-called civil rights movement, there are elements that are becoming more militant. SNCC, militant. CORE, elements down south who were militant. They were gravitating towards Malcolm. Malcolm was organizing them. He was organizing them, getting them ready, right, to take things to another level, right? Malcolm wanted to take them, organize them, and connect them to the Organization of African Unity. Malcolm also wanted to connect African Americans to the Muslim world, whether we were Muslims or not. Malcolm believed that African Americans, that our natural allies, was the Muslim world. And you know that's true. All them black folks you got walking around with Muslim names, they ain't Muslim. Aisha and Jamal, you know what I'm saying? They ain't Muslim. Islam is a part of our heritage. Islam is a part of our culture. So therefore, hey, did y'all know that Arabs get sickle cell too? I'm diverting. Weren't we told that sickle cell was only for black people? Ain't that what they told us? Sickle cells for black people. I met this Arab brother. He said, I got sickle cell. I said, what? You got sickle cell? What you mean you got sickle cell? Brother, Arabs get sickle cell too. I said, boy, no wonder they call y'all saying Negroes. Because they know there's a connection to us. They know there's a connection to us. And Malcolm was forging a connection between the Africans, the Arabs, and the Asians. And what are they doing today? They're trying to forge a fitna between Africans and Arabs. They're still fighting against Malcolm's program to this day. They're still fighting against them. And so Malcolm was taking things to a whole nother level, y'all. But the foundation of everything was his spirituality. This is what's not dealt with. One of the mistakes that was made in the 60s was people took his militancy but not his morals. One of the beautiful things about the Southern Freedom Movement was that it was so spiritual. Dr. King was a spiritual warrior as well, and it was spiritual. The Southern Freedom Movement was spiritual, heavily spiritual, and they couldn't have done it without spirituality. Once it shifted north, the militancy of Malcolm was taken, but not his morals. And so we getting busy and so on and so forth, and like Imam Jamil told us, fighting against that corruption out there without fighting against this corruption in here. And so while we was fighting against that corruption and not fighting against this corruption, we became just like the people we was fighting against. We getting high, we chasing cutie pies, we fall in love with money, we fall in love with wealth, and we're thinking that we're fighting against them. So this go round, we have to take Malcolm's militancy and his morality and his morals. Because any movement in which it's not built on the foundation of morals and moral character is not going anywhere. This thing is coming down because of corruption. And so therefore, if we're fighting against that corruption, we have to realize that to a large extent, they have corrupted us. Like Imam Jamil says, the problem with African Americans is that we are American. You know what I'm saying? And so that culture has seeped in. And we actually end up following some of the main American, I'm talking about the deep stuff, way of thinking. And we don't even realize that we haven't. Malcolm taught us to not look at things the way he sees things. Don't look at the way he sees things. He said, don't struggle within the ground rules that your enemy has laid down. He said, that's insane. So our struggle can't be in between the Democrats and the Republicans. Malcolm told us to go beyond that. Malcolm understood that this country is an empire. And the Democrats and the Republicans think the exact same way. And Malcolm understood that. Malcolm said that this is an empire, and therefore this entire system has to be restructured. He said this system is not geared towards giving freedom to us. The system has to change. And when Malcolm is saying all this, y'all, they're putting more emphasis on Dr. King. Dr. King, I have a dream phase, Dr. King. I have a dream. Man of the year, time to get people to focus more on Dr. King. But we'll talk about Dr. King's shift in a minute. So Malcolm is talking about this in 1964, that we have to go international. We got to think international. We have to build our communities, right? Segregation means we are forced separation. Independence means we're separate because we want to be. Now check this out, y'all. That's, right? Segregation, they made us live there, so we had to build our own institutions because we were segregated. The next go round is we should do it without being forced to do it. We should build our own institutions without being forced to build our own institution. There were some benefits of segregation. We had black schools, black accountants, black doctors, black teachers, black carpenters, black electricians. We had our own infrastructure because we were forced to live that way. No, now we do it without being forced. Now we build institutions without being forced to do it. We do it because that's what we naturally do. And so Malcolm made us understand that we have to build our own. Malcolm made us look at things differently. Don't talk about Crispus Attucks, he said. Don't talk about black people who fought and died for Uncle Sam. You know, the ones they teach us about in school. And he was the first to die in the Revolutionary War. You know what I'm saying? Malcolm said, don't talk about black people who died for Uncle Sam. Talk about black people who died for our freedom. He said that should be our heroes. See, he's teaching us to think differently. Think differently. Look at each other differently. Look at each other differently, right? Don't see a B, or don't call your woman out of her name. See her with honor. Don't see your man as being nothing. See him with honor. But see, you look at television today, and the black man and the black woman are not allowed to be together. You notice that? On TV and in the movies, we're not allowed to be together. And when we're together, there's always friction. You notice that? And you think that it ain't affecting us? You see how black women and black men talk out there. It's TV. Y'all doing it just like on TV. And when Walt Disney did their little thing, it's the first time we've had a black princess. Oh. Right? And they did not show a black prince. We're not going to show a black man as a prince. We ain't doing that. You have to understand how much they are afraid of the black man. A brother could walk into a room, and if there are white men there, the white men are intimidated. And that brother didn't even open his mouth. He might have his hands in his pocket, just chilling. But that's how black men are viewed. And it's not because we steal purses. There's a strength that they fear. Because you have influence on people all over the world. You have influence on people all over the world, and influence equals leadership. If you got influence, that means leadership. And so when they see all these people, these little white kids in the suburbs sagging their pants, because brothers done got locked up and ain't got no belts, and so they sagging, and so they're gonna turn that, all right, we're gonna turn this into a style. Now your white kids in the suburbs is sagging. That's influence, y'all. That's influence. Influence equals leadership. They're afraid of your leadership. That's what they're afraid of, your leadership. And they don't want you to know. Malcolm gave us that understanding. Okay, let me hurry up because I got 10 minutes. Because the last thing I want to talk about is the importance of how to use Malcolm's and also Dr. King's, how to use his thoughts for today. You have to use their thoughts. It can't be just like praising them. It can't be just, wearing their hats and all that. No, we have to understand what they were saying and use what they were saying to analyze what's going on today. If we do that, then we'll be able to see things as they really are. Now hold on to your seats now. The Obama factor. America is an empire. America is an empire. And when George W. Bush was in office, George W. Bush was probably the dumbest, most stupidest president. I'm not talking about Europe, Africa and Asia. And be respected. Be respected. Some of Europe, but Africa and Asia. They pulled Barack Obama in. They needed Barack Obama, y'all. They needed Barack Obama. And check this out, y'all. Barack Obama is already in for next term. It's already decided. Do you know why he's in for the next term, y'all? Do you know why Barack Obama's in? Okay, first they're gonna have y'all go through the illusion, let's vote. Maybe it'll work, right? And so it looks like a democracy and all that kind of stuff, right? The reason why Barack Obama is in is because they can't have a white man in the White House bombing Black Africa. The next theater of operations is Black Africa. Remember Libya? Remember Sudan got carved up? Remember the jets in Somalia? This is Black Africa. And remember the statement that Obama made? He's putting troops in the Congo. He's putting troops in Uganda. They can't have a white man in the White House bombing black Africa. It would wake up black people all over the world because they would see the contradiction. How can we bomb black Africa without black people getting upset? Put a black man in the White House. Because the problem is, what did Dr. King say? They will not be judged by the color of the skin, but by the content of their character. Many of us are judging Barack Obama by the color of his skin and not by the content of his character. And this man is doing stuff that George Bush didn't even do. And we ain't mad. The next theater of operations is Black Africa. They can't have a white man in the White House bombing Black Africa. It would unite all of us, the Caribbean, South America, Central America, United States, black folks in Europe, black folks all over Africa. It would unite all of us into one. Barack Obama is in. They need him. Martin Luther King talked about those, I'm at 39 minutes, 40 minutes. Martin Luther King talked about those black politicians who black people can't relate to. Check out what he said. This is what I mean. You got to use what they said and use what they said to understand what's happening today. Martin Luther King said in his book, Where Do We Go From Here? From Chaos or Community, 1967, late 60s, Dr. King. Like, I've seen my dream turn into a nightmare, Dr. King. Like, I have to go against the Vietnam War, Dr. King. Like, taking a stance against imperialism, Dr. King. Like, saying that we need a redistribution of wealth in this country, Dr. King. Saying that the Dr. King who said we need to shut down this country, Dr. King. Dr. King said, these black politicians come at us and they have no programs for us, make no promises to us, and they expect us to vote for them just because they're black. Come on, y'all. What did he promise us? What programs did he give us? White politicians promise us stuff. They may not do it, but they promise us stuff. What did he promise us? Nothing. What programs did he give us? Nothing. He just expected us to vote for him because he was black. That's based on what Dr. King said. I'm using what Dr. King said, and I'm using what he said to analyze this. And based on what he said, this ain't real. But we'll give a pass for old black folks. We'll give them a pass. Because they saw segregation. Feel me? They saw the things. So old black folks, when they say, son, we got a black president, just say, yes, ma'am. But the younger ones don't get a pass. The younger ones don't get a pass. Don't be taken aback by a black president. Not while America is still an empire. Because while America is still an empire, they will not be able to produce righteous leaders. Not while they're an empire. And Malcolm understood this. Malcolm also understood that there will be a war on Islam. Malcolm said Arabic will be the spiritual language of the future. Malcolm said just as a crusade, the Christian crusade came from Europe, from the west to the east, he said so too the Islamic crusade will come from the east to the west. Malcolm understood. Malcolm was a spiritual warrior. Malcolm was working on buying a masjid. Malcolm brought Sheikh Hassoun from Sudan to teach him about Islam. You think it's a coincidence that Malcolm chose somebody from the Sudan to come and teach him about Islam? Malcolm understood the psychology of African Americans. You got to kill two birds with one stone for African Americans. If you're going to deal with Islam, go to Black Africa and deal with Islam. Because if you don't, you might go to some other country and come back here speaking with an accent, thinking you're Arab now. Nothing against our Arab brothers. We love our Arab brothers. But it could make you not be who you really are. And so Malcolm brought someone from the Sudan because he understood our mentality. He understood our mentality. That was not a fluke. And so Malcolm laid down a legacy. I'll end with this. I'm at 43 minutes, almost 44. I'll end with this right here, because I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about here. Where's that? When Malcolm was martyred, the government said there's 3 people who could become the next Messiah. Stokely Carmichael, who later became Kwame Ture, H. Rap Brown, who later became Imam Jamil Amin, and Martin Luther King. All right? We have moved from the era of civil rights to the era of human rights. After Selma and the Voting Rights Bill, we moved into a new era, which must be an era of revolution. I think we must see the great distinction here between a reform movement and a revolutionary movement. That don't sound like Malcolm? These are revolutionary times. All over the globe, men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression. The shirtless and barefoot people of the land are rising up as never before. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. It is clear to me that the next stage of the movement is to become international. That don't sound like Malcolm? I have said that the problem, the crisis we face, is international in scope. That don't sound like Malcolm? All those quotes were Dr. King. All of them. So when they talk about how Dr. King was leaning towards Malcolm, that's a specific example. Malcolm was in Africa, got a commitment from African leaders. If Dr. King speaks out against what's happening in Congo, we'll make a statement of support of the civil rights movement. Malcolm comes back to the United States, gets with Clarence Jones, who's Dr. King's lawyer, who's a follower of Malcolm, but Dr. King's lawyer, Clarence, tell Dr. King, I got commitments from African leaders. If he says something against what's happening in the Congo, they'll make a statement of support to the civil rights movement in the United Nations. Martin Luther King gets on TV, does an interview, and condemns U.S. policy in the Congo. 3 or 4 African leaders in the United Nations make a statement of support of the civil rights movement in Mississippi. They were working together. They were working together. And so that's why, like Brother Taylor was saying, we commend you for having this program, because as Muslims we're taught, you begin where things left off. You begin where things left off. You begin where things left off. And we have to begin with late 60s Dr. King. We have to begin with Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. We have to begin where they left off. And the beautiful thing about these brothers, and I really end with this, I promise you, is that they, 2 things. They were not in love with wealth, and they were willing to die. All of our leaders. And Malcolm said to Sister Betty, a black leader, a leader is not a leader unless he's willing to go to the grave, the hospital, or the jail. If they're not willing to do those 3 things, they're not a leader. Our leaders, our so-called leaders today, popular names who we know, see what happens as a black man when you stand up, you come to a crossroads and you say, if I keep going, I'm a dead man. And all the black leaders today who we know came to the crossroads and they stopped. They stopped because they're millionaires and they live in palaces and they have fleets of limousines. Our leaders shouldn't live in abject poverty, but our leaders should not be millionaires. And so Martin and Malcolm, the reason why they're praised like they are is because they were not in love with wealth and they were willing to die. And if we're really going to go anywhere today and have true leaders, those are the qualities that they have to have, or we ain't going nowhere. Thank you, y'all. Assalamu alaikum.
we get another round of applause for our speakers this evening? Can we have our speakers come up and have a seat? Getting ready to start our question and answer section. So this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to start it off for you guys. We're going to let them answer, and then after that, it's opened up to the floor. Anybody who has a question, a comment, a concern, raise your hand, and I will do my best to make sure I answer everybody's question. I'm sorry, not me. Gotta pick on you. That way they can answer your question. Are our speakers ready? Okay. I once read that you are where your mind is. And over the last 44 to 47 years, our mind has detoured from what our leaders have put out there. So my question is, today as a parent raising teens and everybody else out here who are parents or the young teens, we are where our minds are. Our minds is not focused on whether or not we can use this bathroom because of our color, whether or not we can ride this bus because of our color, whether or not we can go stand over here because we're women, vice versa. So my question to you, gentlemen, is can you reiterate the importance of us as parents and how important it is to remind them of the history of Dr. King, of Malcolm X, and every other person who has led to their revolutions?
Did you hear me? Do I need it?
To add to brother's point too, like historical continuity. Like how many people here, for example, are in their 50s? 50s. Okay, check it out, 50s, all right? Check this out. The ones who are in their 50s, these are all children of the 60s. These are children of the 60s, the ones in their 50s. How many people here in their 60s? 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 60s, going once, going twice? but it's like, yeah, but OG.
He didn't want to tell you.
Now this generation was our big brother.
Right.
This generation was our big brother. This is who we wanted to be like when we grew up. When we grew up, we wanted to be Panthers. Imagine that? When we grew up, we wanted to be Black Panthers. We didn't want to be NBA players. We didn't want to be pimps. We didn't want to be pushers. We wanted to be Black Panthers. But we weren't old enough yet. We came of age in the 80s when Ronald Reagan was president. That's when we were in our 20s. That's why hip-hop was thrown down, because hip-hop came from our generation, right? And so I want to add some historical continuity. Because of what we were taught by this generation and how we were taught, we remember Muhammad Ali. We remember the Black Panthers. We remember Dr. King. And that right there, the way that our training was, that enables us to help connect with this next generation. And so we have to connect them to the history. They got to be connected to the history, and then once they're connected to the history, then they have to be brought up to date. Here's how it looks today. Here's what's happening today. You know what I'm saying? And make that connection. And then hope and pray that they decide to do the right thing. Like this young black male who has all this influence, who can influence different types of people, Asians, Latinos, white kids, who got all this influence, that we advise him to use that influence in the right way. Use it in the right way. They won't just imitate you sagging. They'll imitate you too if you stand up for truth. They'll imitate you too if you stand up for justice. They'll imitate you too if you stand up for the good. They'll imitate that as well. And so that connection is really important to make.
I'd like to say, brother, how did you end your talk? You said, what did you say? We begin now where we left off. So I think what the brother just said, I mean, this to me represents a wonderful opportunity for those of us that are in the room and connected to whatever we're connected to begin working together. So that, for example, if I'm working with some people to create charter schools, and you got some children going to a failing school, well then I'm telling you, you've got an option. If I've got a tutoring program and your child is failing in school, well bring your child to this tutoring program. I think one of the things I love this brother when he said, man plans, Allah plans, but Allah is a better planner. And then I thought about another scripture that I heard, that man may plan in his heart, but God directs his steps. So we're really on the same page. I mean, like he said, Democrat, Republican, ultimately our lives here on earth are limited. None of us are going to physically be here 100 years from now. No one in this room, except maybe the child that's there that's 1 or 2, may live to be 101 or 2 or 3. But bottom line, none of us will physically be here. So somehow spiritually, we have to come together, not wait for next year. I mean, I'll be here, don't get me wrong, for the 2nd annual, but we need to have some ongoing dialogue. I see some of my partners in the room who work with me with Stand Up, with the mayor and Indivisible, which is a kind of a black unity group. And so to me, Layla, we need to work together and plan weekly dialogues, get-togethers. If you have children that need help real time right now, then somebody needs to come talk to me, because we do have a tutoring program at CRC across the street 3 days a week. And I tell every parent, any parent in this room, your child won't fail unless you want them to. We have resources in place and we're gonna help them. And so that's, for me, the reality of how this thing needs to move. I'm not down for once a year kumbayas. I'm talking about, like I showed you guys on that award that I got, we are in the fierce urgency of now. If we don't make a difference bombing Black Africa, it may not be something you see on TV, because you may be in prison and not be able to see it. So that's just my piece.
Yeah, like there's people out there doing things. So pick an organization. Pick an organization of people doing things. And in some of these organizations too, it's like Muslims and Christians together, getting down. Like that picture of Dr. King and Malcolm, one of the things that should represent is like Muslim-Christian unity. Do you know in the Quran, Allah says the people who you will find the most friendly towards you are those who call themselves Christians. That's in the Quran. And so when we see that, Malcolm and Dr. King, yeah, one of the things that represents is Muslim-Christian unity. And there are organizations out there that are doing something. So we should choose an organization. You know what I'm saying? The other thing is like, now I'm going to African-American Muslims, we're not as organized as we should be. We're not as tight as we should be. We're not as strong as we should be, and there's no excuse for it because of what we have and what we come out of. You know what I'm saying? And so there's people doing stuff, and then we need to do more things. Like programs like this should be fuel for our activism. Not to come here, like brother was saying earlier, not to come here to be entertained. This should be fuel. It's fuel, because every once in a while you got to get, you know what I'm saying, we got to get charged up, you know what I'm saying, re-energized, and go back out there to work. Well, there's people in here who are doing some things. And so we have to find out what those things are. Yeah, you're working with young people, let me get with you. Can I get with you? That type of thing. Get with them. You know what I'm saying? Work on that Muslim-Christian unity. You know what I'm saying? There's some Christians who are active. They follow in that Dr. King tradition. We got to get with them. We got to get with them. You feel me? And then, then there are things that we have to do that we're responsible for.
And one other thing too, I was just thinking about being proactive. We got to stop waiting and reacting to. In other words, if we know that Kevin Johnson's going to be mayor again for 4 years, let's say, and we know that Barack Obama is going to become president again, let's say, then we should already have in plan for 2016, what does it look like after they're gone? See what I mean? I think sometimes in our community as black folks, we look day to day, week to week, and then many of us middle class get a check once a month. But those of us that are independently wealthy, then we're thinking year to year, decade to decade. In other words, I don't have a business plan to make money just next month and for the rest of this year. I'm already thinking about 2022, so that my children will have a lifestyle that they can live, comfortably in America. So we need to expand our time horizons and not just react to what's happening, but begin to plan ahead and strategize what we want, so that people will then be following us instead of us always following them.
Fighting against how this man is all about division. His whole mindset, his philosophy, his worldview is all about division. He started off by dividing God. Once you divide God, that's how serious this man is about division. And so we have to get beyond division. The thing that tripped Malcolm out was he kept saying the belief in the one God. The power of the one God, the power of belief in the one God. Because he saw all these different types of people worship him and acting like brothers because they were worshiping the same one God, like the one God. And so this enemy that we're dealing with today, the bottom line of what he's against is any philosophy, any ideology, any worldview that produces unity. He don't want it at all. And so he don't want black folks united. He don't want people of conscience united. He don't want good people united. I mean, he don't want unity at all. So we have to get beyond those things that divide us. You know what I'm saying? And then really work on the things that unite us. And so as a Muslim, I would say we first need to start with focusing on one God. Focus on the one God. Focus on the oneness of God. And once we focus on the oneness of God, we'll see oneness in everything. We'll see unity in everything.
And I just want to say, it gets down to creates community development. So one of the challenges I have since, as the sister shared with you earlier, I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm 51. I started when I was about 20.
Child of 60.
Child of the 60s, right. And one of the challenges I see is pregnancy by accident versus pregnancy on purpose. And I'm saying that to say that too many times in our community, we are bringing children into the world that we are not in a position to take care of, and in many cases don't plan on taking care of. So I understand that, I know there's some young people in the room, so I'm not going to get too deep into what I'm saying, but the bottom line is, if you have sex unprotected, you bring a child into the world, that becomes your responsibility. What you want in life at that point ceases to be important. Everything that child needs becomes your priority. So even if you didn't plan, and I got 5 kids, so I'm gonna be honest, I didn't plan all of them. A couple of them were pregnancy by accidents, but what I did, I prioritized. So I didn't plan for it, right? But once I knew they were coming, they then had to become my priority. And so what I want to say to the sister's question is, we can't do anything to change the community, the neighborhood, the society until you as an individual take responsibility for yourself. If you leave this event tonight and go to a party and have a 40 and smoke a blunt, that's on you. If tomorrow you decide not to go to the church if you're a Christian or the mosque if you're a Muslim, and you're not faithful in reading the Quran or reading the Word and really trying to develop yourself, that's on you. There's nothing we can do. Everyone in this room has to take responsibility for themselves first. Self-improvement creates community development, period.
Because that's got to be our focus. The youth must be our focus today. Because the goal right now, I believe that where we're headed right now is equivalent to Hitler's quote-unquote final solution. Like Hitler felt that this would do the Jews in for good. I believe that's where we're at right now, focusing on young black males particularly. This is going to do them for good. We're going to put so many of them in prison that it's going to destabilize them for the next millennium. You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing. We have to really focus on our youth. But we got to organize to do it, though. We have to organize to do it. We also have to encourage our youth, those of our youth who are revolutionary. We have to encourage them to be revolutionary. Because you know what? In order to turn our backs on their culture, we have to be revolutionary. Boyfriend-girlfriend culture, that's their culture. That's their culture. Separating sex from marriage, that's their culture. Going to the party, hitting the blunt, that's their culture. The problem with African Americans is that we are American. And so we have to focus on the youth to encourage them to be revolutionary enough to turn their back on that filthy, nasty culture that they taught us. And there's some youth who are willing to do it, but they just need the guidance to do it. But in order for us to do it, we got to be organized. We got to be organized. We got to find out, again, who's doing stuff. This brother's doing stuff. Our brother Hassan Abdul Malik, y'all work together. This Christian, this Muslim, they working together with youth. They're working together with youth. And there's other people out there. Let's find out what's out there, and then find out which one you want to join. Find out which one you want to join, and then bring your ideas to it. You know what I'm saying? Maybe we can do this.
So that's just to stand up. So in other words, we had a young male conference today at Genesis High School. Every third Saturday, Dr. Hassan Abdel Malik is our parent support facilitator at the Alpha Academy. We work with the March of Dimes and Planned Parenthood. So like my brother said, what I'm trying to do is stop the proliferation of at-risk youth. In other words, there is no such thing as an illegitimate child. There's just illegitimate parents. Adults bringing children into the world. So like in your case, if you're saying, I want to do something with my kids, you got a team of black folks right here, right now. We meet right across the street on the third Saturday of every month from 10 o'clock to 1 o'clock. And in between the third month, we got tutoring 3 days a week, every Tuesday and Wednesday night and every Saturday morning. So you have access to professional, college-educated black men and women 4 days a week. And you got emails and phone calls. So we're not gonna let anybody die. We're not gonna let anybody just float down the river, like I always like to use the Katrina incident. When I was sitting here in Sacramento and the storm hit New Orleans, I'm sitting there watching TV, watching all these black people float down the river. Well, we're not doing that. We throwing life preservers in. That sister that's sitting right next to you in the aisle that just talked earlier is the president of the parent support group. She's right there sitting next to you. I know she didn't want me to put her on blast, but there it is. Somewhere I'm telling you, I can look in the crowd, there's 4 or 5 people in this crowd, part of my team. And all we talking about is growing the team. This is the crisis of today. We not got to wait around for them to save our kids. One, we need to tell people stop having kids if you ain't going to take care of them. If the kid is already here, we're going to do our best to work with you to take care of that kid. But if you get in our way, we're going to take you out and we're going to take your kid. That's how the game's going to get played. I mean, I'm telling you, that's the way this deal is going down. We're going to stop you from having kids if you can't take care of it. And then if we're going to try to do everything we can to help you take care of that kid, and at that point, if you can't do that, the kid is ours. It's a wrap from there. We're going to take back our community. And we're doing it right now, one family at a time.
Before we go on,
The message of trying to keep our kids out of the juvenile justice system. Not so many years ago, I was a juvenile chaplain in the California Youth Authority. I've gone from that to become a commissioner on the Juvenile Parole Board. My message today is, may Allah bless these brothers for coming out here and pulling us together like this, both of them, and giving them traveling safety back to their families. And my message to us as a community is, hold your kids accountable before I'm forced to hold them accountable.
That's right, amen.
If you don't understand what I mean, I'll tell you. They're coming into the juvenile system faster than you can imagine. And once they get into it, like the brother said, there are few exits out of it at all. There's only one exit out of it. But most of them can't find that exit. So I want to ask Imam Abdel Malik Ali, what was the name of the book reference that you talked about the new
Jim Crow
mantra, the new Jim Crow,
by
in
Michelle
terms of our
Alexander.
children being in the juvenile justice system?
Yeah, the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander is a must read. It's a must read. You got to read that book because the government has adopted the policy of mass incarceration. Mass incarceration. Can you imagine adopting a policy of mass incarceration where your policy is to put as many young black males in jail as possible and privatizing the prison industry? So when you privatize the prison industry, a prison makes its money by how many beds are filled, and then you go ahead and you go ahead and pay for legislation that makes sure there's mandatory minimums, that people have to spend as much time in prison as they possibly can. Wherever you have mass incarceration, you have mass unemployment. Because you can't have mass incarceration without mass unemployment. So this is critical. And check this out. While this is going on, while this is happening, the top cop in the country is a black man. I'm telling you the game that they playing. I'm telling you the game. The top cop, William Holden, is a black man while this country is implementing a policy of mass incarceration. You know what I'm saying? And so we gotta deal with this because prisoners are used as slaves. So when a brother says, man, I ain't going back to prison, he's saying I ain't going back to slavery. How's that different from back in the day, y'all? That ain't different. Back in the day, I ain't going back to slavery. And now today, I ain't going back to prison. That's the same thing. It's the same thing. And so this whole mass incarceration thing, we have to deal with that. We got to deal with that from within in terms of our community, and we have to deal with it from without. And so you got to read that book, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander.
And just to further elaborate on that, because I did read it, Michelle was here actually last year. And again, as we begin to create a better coalition in terms of the groups and organizations, we can start rolling together so that when these things come up, you guys are all connected. The whole thing, the war on drugs, if you guys remember, I mean, Richard Nixon came in on the banner of law and order. They're going to restore law and order in America. Well, what were they saying? They were saying we got to get these Negroes off the street and stop protesting and bus ride and sitting in. That was Reagan, 68. Y'all voted for him. Well, y'all, maybe y'all didn't, but you know what I mean. So anyway, so then Reagan comes along in 1980, implements a war on drugs. There was no epidemic in America in 1980, y'all.
Right.
Not on drugs.
Right.
It came later, but they had already put in effect the war on drugs. And all the money the FBI was getting and the Department of Justice, they started giving it to the local police departments. You could become a millionaire if you were a sheriff in Los Angeles based upon how many jokers you locked up. They have asset seizure rules. So then my buddy Ron, you driving around in your 6'4", I can take that because you had some weed in the glove compartment. That car's mine. Or it becomes the police department, but then they'll have a little auction and then I'll get it anyway, if you know what I'm saying. So then they have minimum sentencing. Minimum sentencing. Young sister, 35 years old. Happened to be riding with her younger brother. Didn't know the brother had a little vial of crack in the car. They arrested them both. She said, but I didn't know he had it. I didn't know. Right. He knows because he's a commissioner. They have to minimally sentence people. And the 3 strikes deal, right? You steal a Coke, right? Then you get a pizza, then a bicycle. Now you are in prison for the rest of your life. Unbelievable. And if you guys want, if you want to buy into the capitalism way of life, you can invest in stock in prisons, particularly in Texas, Arizona, and Louisiana. Why? Because illegal immigration. Let people in. Then we lock them up for being an illegal immigrant. Now they work in our prison, and we got them making all the furniture and clothes and everything else we want, and we get money for that. So this is real. So it gets back to me that individually, we got to take responsibility, but don't leave here tonight, please, and just say, man, that was a great event. They had some good speakers. That was some good information, and not do something. You may not be in a position where you got children that are suffering, but you can come out and help. And I'll share my information with Rashid and then, Kalima, so we can get some kids and some families help right now, real time.
And so you young people, you should know that the reason why they came up with the war on drugs was to put young brothers in jail. And the reason why they went after young brothers is because they did a report during the 60s. And they said, what was the main profile of the person out there in the streets? They said the main profile of the person out there in the streets were young black males. And they were not necessarily unemployed. And so based on that, starting in the 1970s, policy started changing. Not only policy started changing, y'all, but leaders not only got killed, but I'm going to tell you something. The movie started changing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Superfly and the Mac. Then the music started changing. The music got nasty and filthy and was made up, it got phony music. And the stuff they were saying was nasty and filthy. And so things started changing. In 1980, 81, I remember distinctly reading an article in the Los Angeles Times, urban black youth becoming more militant. Because the children of the 60s were in our 20s now. We was 21, 22, 23. Urban black youth becoming more militant. That was the early 80s. And then all of a sudden there was a war on drugs. You got to look at this in historical context. It's like they were doing it because the soldiers, they want to put as many soldiers in prison as possible. Because they don't want, you have to understand, during this time in the 60s, they thought this country was going through a revolution. That's what they believed. This country was going through a revolution, and at the core of it was these black folks. They at the core of it. You know what I'm saying? And so our communities were destroyed. They encouraged the formation of gangs, of Crips and Bloods, because they didn't want these brothers joining the Panthers. They didn't want them joining the Panthers. And so they encouraged the Crips and the Bloods. That was encouraged by the government. And so now then the gangs start turning on each other. And now there's guns, there's drugs, and there's gangs in the community. So now the brothers ain't talking about the system, the brothers talking about you, nigga. You on my turf. The soldiers were turned on the community. I'm saying this was systematic. It was systematic. And it's always systematic. It don't stop, y'all. And it's the same thing is still going on. So we got to bring this to our young people. Because Malcolm said, the only one who's going to be able to relate to them are the ones who's going to be like telling them the truth. Because they can tell when you tell them the truth. And so this thing is still going on. And so we need to see some brothers coming together. We need to see some sisters coming together to help with these sisters who are coming up without daddies. who their self-esteem is low. When we deal with these young people today, we got to deal with the whole young person. And I'm just saying, that's why we got to have our thing right, because we got to give an example of Islam, y'all. I'm just saying. You know what I'm saying? Because we got to deal with their intellectual, we got to deal with their physical, we got to deal with their emotional state, we got to deal with their psychological state, we got to deal with all aspects of them. It's got to be like a total way of life. So that's why when I see these young Muslims in here, like, I'm giving all props to you, because there's a lot of y'all have a serious role to play, a major role to play. But we got to bring a message to these young people to let them know that, we have to admit when we've gotten corrupted. And this system has corrupted us. So now we have to be willing to fight against that corruption, to fight against it. And they got to see more brothers. They got to see more brothers. They got to see more black men who are conscious. We got to be visible. Because a lot of these young brothers ain't seeing no daddies. They ain't seeing no fathers. And they want their daddies. I don't care how hard they try to look. I don't care how hard they try to be. They want their daddies. And if there's any brothers in here who ain't got contact with their sons, get contact with your sons. Amen. I don't care if their mothers are tripping, try. Right. Try. Right. You know what I'm saying? But be in contact with your sons. Because if we ain't in contact with our sons and it don't mean nothing to us, that's slavery. The reason why many black men during slavery didn't put out like they should, because they knew, what's going to happen? What's going to happen if I marry my wife and she gets sold? What's going to happen if I marry my wife and I have a daughter and master wants her? So brothers are like in an unstable position. You know what I'm saying? Well, brothers are in an unstable position today too. It ain't no excuse. But there's brothers out there, young boys growing up without fathers. And they got to see other males. They got to see other black males. If it's not going to be in their own families, they got to see it in the organizations that are out there. We got to get with them. And they got to see us. And the first thing we got to put out there is moral character. Moral character. Not intellect. Not saying it ain't important, it's necessary, but it ain't sufficient. They got to see moral character in us, first and foremost. Because the corruption, it's becoming immoral to be moral. It's becoming immoral to be moral. And if you take a moral stance on something, people look at you like you crazy. And you're taking a moral stance. That's how corrupt things have gotten. But so what? You know what I'm saying? We got to put that moral force out there. We got to put that spiritual force out there, and they got to see us doing it. They got to see us, and it's got to be organized. I'm sorry if I went on, but it's a passionate thing. Like brother said, like these are like, it's an emergency, y'all. That's right. It's an emergency. There's another 60s type period coming to this bad boy. There's another 60s type period coming to America. They're using us as Muslims as an excuse to take away civil liberties. That ain't for us. They know it's going to go down in America because there's so many poor people. There's so many people losing their homes, their jobs, their pensions. So many people who are hungry. So many people without health care. They know what's coming. Another 60s type period is coming. And so we gotta bring it. We gotta bring it, y'all.
So the only other point I wanted to make was on the $40 million slave issue. The NBA players, NFL players. So for those of you that like your kids to be athletically involved and so forth, don't drink the Kool-Aid too much. Because what we're seeing is too many families are putting their children in entertainment type cheering and gymnastics and soccer and football and basketball. They're failing in school or maybe getting C's and D's, but they go and play soccer all over the state and all over the country thinking that somehow they're going to do something. And even if they do something, think about this, for example. I was just writing down here, there are 30 NBA teams. Each has about 15 players. So there's about 450 guys annually that are professional ball players in the NBA. Just 450 guys. And I can show you that over the last 5 years, 50% of the guys ain't there no more. The average time a guy plays in the NBA is 3 years. Come out of college, if he's lucky, he's 22. He gets a 3-year deal with the NBA, he's 25. He will no longer play again, ever. What is he gonna do? He's 25. They carried him through the system. He can't read, he can't write.
Of Malcolm to this day. Because the effects of Malcolm are still being felt around the world. When the United States government says to Americans, do not go to that part of the world, they ain't talking about us. We can go. They talking about Joe the plumber. Joe the plumber can't go, but we can go. Seriously, black people can go. We can go. Now we can't go over there, Uncle Tommy. We go over there, Uncle Tommy, we can get snatched up. But as black folks, we can go. How come we can go? Because Malcolm, when he went international, he internationalized our struggle. And so people all around the world, y'all underestimate how much people around the world respect us because we are black people in America and because of our legacy of resistance and struggle. You'd be surprised. The government, the system knows how much we are respected. That's why they needed a black man in the White House. Now, Malcolm. We'll get back in terms of how he internationalized our struggle. Now, Malcolm, I like the format. It reminds me of the Quran when Allah says, truly you shall move from stage to stage. And Malcolm moved from stage to stage. As Malcolm Little, as the brother and the sister showed, Malcolm grew up in a strong household, mother and father strong, and people used to underestimate because they didn't know how active Malcolm's mother and father was in the Garvey movement. The movement of Garvey, you cannot underestimate the movement of Garvey. But this is Garvey had the largest organization among African Americans in our history. If y'all ever seen Red, Black, and Green, we thought that started in the 60s. No, it started in the 20s. Marcus Garvey started Red, Black, and Green, right? But he had like 3 to 6 million people in his organization. But growing up, you saw no effects of the Garvey movement. Where's the effects of the Garvey movement? Where's it at? Because this was a huge movement, straight up, right? But then there were subtle manifestations of the Garvey movement. Remember the Deacons for Defense? The Deacons for Defense down south? Those were the children of Garveyites. Remember in the Montgomery bus boycott, what did they name the organization? The Montgomery Improvement Association. What was Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association? Malcolm's father was a Garveyite. Used to go to different, him and his wife used to go to different parts of the country, setting up chapters of the Garvey movement. Malcolm's mother had a cousin who was one of Marcus Garvey's bodyguards, that when Garvey was going around, one of the places he would stay was their house. And so Malcolm and his sisters and brothers remembered some of the Garveyite meetings.
Again, you guys give yourselves a round of applause for coming and joining us tonight. Our final speaker for this evening is Amir Abdel Malik. He serves as an imam of Masjid Al-Salams in Oakland. He's been there for over 20 years. Give that a round of applause. Nowadays, we just find longevity to be extinct. That's all. Abdel Malik has dedicated his life's work to community building, teaching Islam, and advocating for the oppressed and disenfranchised. We are delighted to have Amir Abdel Malik with us tonight. Welcome. Yes.
Oh, that's another thing, huh? That's okay. That's okay, I'll do this. I'm all right. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله أحمده واستعينه واستهديه واستغفره وأؤمن به جل وعلا ولا أكفره وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. My respected brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, I greet you in the greeting words of peace. Peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. Let's get going. Make sure I'm timing myself here. In the Holy Quran, Allah talks about Pharaoh. As a matter of fact, many people may not know, but the prophet who's talked about the most in the Holy Quran is the prophet Moses. No other prophet is talked about as much in the Holy Quran than the prophet Moses, peace be upon him. Allah talks about how Moses, peace be upon him, when he was living in Egypt, Pharaoh divided up his society into different groups. and he oppressed every one of the groups. And there was a particular group in Pharaoh's society who he was particularly afraid of because he felt a revolution would come from them. And he was particularly afraid of the men who would come from them. And those people were called the Bani Israel. And so Pharaoh, afraid of particularly that particular group, he instituted a policy of killing the boys and sparing the women. Not sparing the women from oppression, but killing the boys, getting the men out the way. Because he was concerned that the revolutionary, they remembered. And so what happened, of course, was that in order to destroy the family, what they have to do? Go after the father. Because the household was disciplined. He could build his own house, he could grow his own food. His wife, very educated, taught the children French, made sure they didn't eat pork. They would like homeschool them basically. Homeschool the children, Malcolm's mother, right? This was an organized, disciplined household. Go after the father. And once they went after the father, then it was only a matter of time before the family was destroyed. Malcolm, of course, then is parceled off. His family's parceled off. Malcolm goes to the 8th grade. Malcolm tells his teacher, I want to be a lawyer. You can't be no lawyer, Malcolm. You're a nigger. Malcolm was finished with school after that. Malcolm's formal education was the 8th grade. The 8th grade was the extent of his formal education. So, of course, you drop out of school, right? Because of the discouragement that you get in school. You special ed, you can't do it. Discouragement. You drop out. Once you drop, father's already gone. Discouraged in the schools. Where is he going from there? The streets. And so now Malcolm Little now becomes Detroit Red, getting into a little bit of everything. Always high, getting into everything, right? Got to Boston, got to Roxbury, and then he went to Harlem and said, oh my Lord. Because Harlem is just Harlem. Harlem's still Harlem. They moving black folks out of Harlem right now, but Harlem's still Harlem though. And Malcolm saw that, and of course Malcolm just got busy in them streets. And of course, once you get busy in them streets, it's only a matter of time before you're going to end up in prison. Malcolm ends up in prison at about 19 years old. Malcolm is reading and writing at a 4th grade level. A 4th grade level when he gets to prison, right? 2 things happen to Malcolm in prison, of course. One, the brother in prison, Malcolm, he it's another name change. Satan. The prisoner called Malcolm Satan. Not the prison guards, the prisoners called Malcolm Satan because he curses all the time and he always cursing God and he's always cursing religion. Man, that's Satan. So now Detroit Red becomes Satan. And so while he's in prison, one brother in prison who Malcolm respected for his knowledge, Malcolm said he can control a conversation without cursing. And in an autobiography, he called him Bimby. As a fictitious name. And this brother told Malcolm, you got a good mind, man. You got a good mind. You should really work on your mind. That's the first thing that happened to Malcolm, right? I'll say 3 things. The second major thing that happened to Malcolm, Ella, his sister. This is one of the reasons why Spike Lee's movie was probably the biggest flaw in Spike Lee's movie. He didn't mention Ella at all. It's going to come from that particular group, and it's going to come from the men of that particular group. If you take that example in the Quran and apply it to America, you will see that America has set up this society into different groups. And all the groups are being oppressed. The Latinos, the black folks, Asian, Muslims, different groups. But there's a particular group that this government fears could cause a revolution. And that particular group are black people. And from these black people, the men from this group, someone will come from the men from this group, and so therefore, we have to institute the policy of killing the men and sparing the women. So you young brothers, and see, we have to have talks with our sons. Just like mothers have talked with their daughters about, you're gonna become a woman someday, here's some of the things that happen, so on and so forth. We have to have talks with our sons that they are living in a society that is designed to destroy them. Step 1, son, they're going to separate you from your father. Step 2, son, they're going to give you a poor education and probably put you in special ed to make you think you're stupid. Step 3, son, you're going to rebel against that. And therefore, you're going to drop out of school and then up in the streets. Step 4, son, once you get in the streets, it's either hall or prison. Syllabus, son, of how to kill a black man. And so if we do not sit down with our daughters and talk about the changes that they're going through as women, that's cruel and irresponsible. If we don't sit down with our sons and let them know how this system systematically tries to destroy black men, starting with black boys, that is cruel and irresponsible. They have to know the type of society that they are living in so they'll know how to look at it. They have to understand how this society views them. Do you know this society is so cold that if they see that a black boy had a problem birth, meaning like, you know, the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck, so on and so forth, alhamdulillah, he came through, they use that as an excuse to put a jacket on him all throughout school. The next thing you know, he flunks the first grade. How you flunk the first grade? But that puts a jacket on him, and it gives him a feeling of inferiority. It gives him a feeling like, you know, he ain't got it, and so on and so forth, all throughout. And then they hit him with felonies at 16 and 17 years old. And if you haven't read the book, The New Jim Crow, you have to read the book, The New Jim Crow. Because once you hit a young brother with a felony at 17, 18, 19 years old, for the rest of his life, he can be legally discriminated against. And so this is a society, a pharaonic society, that sees as their biggest threat the African American. Why? Example, don't you see how other people imitate y'all? Whatever youth in America are doing, if you want to know what youth in America are doing, look at black youth. Because whatever black youth are doing, that's what all other youth are going to be doing. In Malaysia, it's the style to look like a young black male. In Malaysia. They hip-hopping in China. They hip-hopping in India. It is the influence that black people have that scares the system. So that's why you see on TV so many negative images of black men. Criminals, and whoa, hold your purse. Oh my God, a black man, that kind of thing. Because this system looks at black people in general and the black man in particular as the revolutionaries who could come and destroy our whole setup. That's what's going on. Now, Malcolm. This system thought that Malcolm was the Messiah. Quotation marks. I'll quote the FBI. We must prevent the rise of a Messiah. Quotation marks. You know in English, when you put quotation marks, it means figure of speech. That's what the FBI did. We must prevent the rise of a Messiah who could unify and electrify the black nationalist movement. Malcolm X might have been such a Messiah. He is the martyr of the movement today. So this system felt that the Messiah might have been an African American male Muslim. And if you think that they got away from that, think again when you think about the fact that one of the people who they thought would carry on that role was a man by the name of H. Rap Brown, who became Imam Jamil Abdullah El Amin, who's being locked down in Colorado underground for a crime that he didn't commit. Preventing the rise of a Messiah is still the policy of the United States government. This government is still afraid of the legacy that was laid down by Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. If you go back to the inauguration of Barack Obama, Dianne Feinstein, when she got up there, she took a stab at Malcolm at the inauguration. This is how much they're afraid of him. Dianne Feinstein got up there and said, she praised everyone who voted for Obama. We'll talk about Obama a little later, inshallah. But she praised everyone for voting for Obama, and she praised them by saying, for those of you who chose the ballot over the bullet, they are still afraid